All right, welcome everybody to native iOS and Android app accessibility, or as it was called, I think in the actual card, an app developer's guide to accessibility. I've been working a little bit with mobile apps, and I figured, this might be a good talk to discuss native iOS, Android accessibility as well. At first, I said, I'll give this talk, but I don't know if there's going to be a lot of interest, because I don't know how many mobile app developers there are. And then I spoke with Lisa Sawan, who's in the room, and she said, there may not be developers, but there will be people who will be buying apps, who will be reviewing apps, so that's something that's going to be important right now to the Yale community, to make sure that whatever we have and we put out there is accessible, even if it's not a website. But I'll also go through some general tips for just accessibility on a mobile device. This is a very new topic to me, so please bear with me. I'll try my best to kind of go through it. I'm by no means an expert, but I just kind of wanted to share what I've learned as I've gone through this. So the type of mobile apps. So usually you go to the App Store, you download an app, you use it. Sometimes you like it, sometimes you don't. Most actually get abandoned after a little while, where they just live on your phone. But there's three kinds of ways to develop apps, or at least three general ways that I wanted to at least discuss. So the first is native, where someone's a developer, they go in, they get Xcode, they get Android Studio, they write native Objective-C Swift code, or they write Android, Java or Kotlin on Android. They package it, they bundle it, and they put it on the App Store. Usually for this kind of thing, you need developers who are specifically iOS, Swift, and Android. In many big companies, they're two separate teams that never even talk to each other. But usually this is where you get, or tend to get, the best performance. If you're doing animation, you can usually tell the difference between a native app and sort of other types of apps that I'll get to on here. And then, so I'm going to skip down to the third one, which is a hybrid app, where you actually build the application in HTML, CSS, JavaScript. It's called the usual framework that's used for that is called Cordova. And what that is literally a web page that's bundled into an app put on the App Store. But usually you could tell when you're browsing a web page through an app, it kind of is not a good experience. It takes forever to load. So usually it's we try to avoid it if we want like a fast native app feel for it, but it's still useful in many apps. And then there's also a non-native kind of approach, which is like React Native or Xamarin, where you write in a different programming language and then it sort of compiles it down to native code that the phone can understand. So how is mobile app accessibility different than the web? According to the W3C, mobile accessibility is covered in the existing, sort of accessibility standard guidelines, and the basic concepts really remain the same. So, if you have an image, the sort of assistive device needs to be able to read associated text. If it doesn't, then you have accessibility issues. Color contrast is very important as well. Transcripts for video, audio, ability to use a keyboard with it. These are all important items that, just because they're not on the desktop anymore, they're using a native app, are still important to make sure that they're accessible. How a user interacts with the device, right? So I think when a lot of us build for accessibility, we imagine someone sitting at a desk, with a desktop or laptop and, typing on a keyboard or using an assistive device. But I think a lot more users with disabilities are using mobile devices, iPhones, iPads, Android devices, especially with their mobility. I think it may be easier for them to sort of carry around with them and even use. And we've seen a changing landscape where more and more people are only using mobile devices and not using desktop and laptops anymore. And then they have different backend code databases for native apps. So there's no HTML, CSS, JavaScript. It's all sort of in the native code. The screen reader software is different. And I was working on an issue the other day where VoiceOver, which is the screen reader software that Apple puts out, on the Mac OS X laptop, we had an issue where we set focus back to an H1 tag and it was read properly on the laptop. And we tried it on the iPad and it did not read properly. And I was in shock. I said, this is the same company, the same name of the software, VoiceOver for OS X, VoiceOver for iOS, but it's reading two different items, right? Why is this reading something different? So, it's actually a good thing to learn mobile sort of screen reader tools so that you can say, oh, it works on the laptop. Let's make sure it works on the mobile device as well. And this goes for websites too, not necessarily just native apps. And then, so while ARIA labels, I don't know if everyone's familiar with ARIA labels, which sort of give an extra descriptive layer to HTML tags, native apps actually have the ability to sort of talk to a user through these things called accessibility labels. So you can say in a native mobile app, when this action occurs, I need an accessibility announcement to the user, which may actually display or may talk some text to the user that's using a screen reader device. And I think that's really cool because you can really target, if they click off of somewhere that they're not supposed to, or a native app, you can actually, read out an action. Whereas in HTML, it's slightly more difficult to read out an accessible, piece of text. So just some iOS tools. VoiceOver. Has anybody used screen readers before? On PC, JAWS, on the Mac, VoiceOver. Okay. I recommend highly getting familiar with them. There's a lot of good guides. And VoiceOver is also available on the Mac, on the iOS, iPad, iPhones. It's very good to be familiar with them. They're not that difficult to use. They do certain gestures, and there's cheat sheets out there. I can never remember which gesture or what keys to hit. And then there's also the accessibility inspector. Now, I don't know is anyone a mobile app developer here? No? Okay. So it's if you have source code for an app, you can actually inspect certain pieces of the app once you build it. And then say, okay, do they have the right traits? Do they have button labels? Do they have the proper text label associated with it? If you're getting it from a vendor, you may not get the source code from them to do that, but that's just a tool that you can use to sort of inspect for accessibility. Android tools TalkBack. It's similar to VoiceOver, it kind of talks to you through use of gestures or keyboard. And there's also an accessibility scanner, which is a neat automated tool for Android that will take a snapshot of a mobile app screen or any screen on your phone and give you hints. Obviously it's not going to do all of accessibility review for you, but it'll give you hints. Your color contrast is low. The height of this button is small. Actually, first time I used it, I got a phone call in the middle of it, and it took a snapshot as the phone call was coming in and told me that the phone call screen was not accessible and had many issues on it, the default Android phone call screen. And I went through a bunch of the other tools. I'm like, a lot of these are just not, the accessibility scanner is telling me the native apps on the phone are not accessible or have issues, I should say. So keyboard. So when you're doing accessibility reviews on the desktop, you have your keyboard. You usually try to do tab through it. You can hook up a Bluetooth keyboard as well to both the iPad, iPhone, Android tablets. It's from what I've read, the iPhone is not as good with keyboards, but when I've done it, I've really had no issues. You can use the keyboard just to navigate through. You can use the keyboard in conjunction with VoiceOver. And I put the last point, Android has fairly robust support, but I think from what I've used iOS, it just has just as good support for it. So, okay. So just some general tips if you're reviewing an app. Make sure you allow for device rotation. So a lot of times you'll get an app and it'll be locked to either portrait or landscape. Right? I'm sure we've all used apps like that. But imagine this, if a user had an iPad, maybe if they have a wheelchair, if they're in some sort of lab where the thing is locked into place, into portrait mode, and the app displays in landscape. That's going to be a bad user experience for anybody. So, make sure that you have the ability to rotate. Many times parts of the application will use web views. And what is a web view? So you may have a native app, and we've all seen this, but you'll click on a link and it'll take you to a web page that's kind of embedded within the app. It may not be even a full sort of hybrid Cordova app. It might just be that a couple of the links go to these pages. If it's a core function of your app, you may want to check that this web page is accessible. And a lot of times these web pages or websites may be out of our control, which gets very tricky. But in an ideal situation, the internal sort of page that you show would be. You can also break out of the app to another website, although that may not be a good experience for both users without disabilities and users with. And make sure choose standard font so that if a user needs to zoom, it could scale and zoom as well. And avoid trying to use custom controls. So if you're sort of working with a vendor and they say, well, we're going to build out this custom control that's going to be kind of like a slider but slightly different, the native sort of controls within iOS and Android have accessibility features built into them. Once you start going sort of with these custom solutions or custom components, they may not build the accessibility features and you may have issues. And especially if you try to go back to the vendor and 2-3 years down the line, the vendor may not be there. It's now on you to update these custom controls. So, that's just something to think about, is if they're doing some crazy custom, element, just be aware that, you should ask them, is this going to be accessible? How is this going to be supported? And also never rely solely on mobile features. Like, if you take your phone and it says shake to do action XYZ and you have to shake, if a user can't pick up their phone or if a user has trouble holding it, there has to be an alternative way for the user to execute that action, not only shaking, not only voice commands, custom gestures, right? Spin a wheel in a certain way, is there a way that, and it's not a native sort of gesture, be very careful of that. So ideally you'd stick to what sort of the system provides for you to create your app, and try to avoid using sort of custom gestures. So page, screen, and title. So everyone's familiar with HTML title tag. Usually the voiceover on Mac or JAWS will read, you click a link, you go to a new page, it'll read out to you what the page is. Now in a native app, there's no HTML, there's no page titles in a sense. They're actually kind of screens within an app. And so when you go to a screen, it should have either programmatically or at the top of the screen a title associated with it, so that when you get to it, you can, it'll read out to you, you're on the following, it won't say you're on the following, but it'll say the screen title. So a user who switched screens knows that they've gone to a different location. It tends to be at the header bar, but if you replace it with an image, you can programmatically have the ability to set the actual title for it. And when using tab navigation styles, make sure that the label as well as the state are selected. So what that means is, on iOS, you usually see icons on the bottom. If you click on an icon and then the user is going through the menu, it should tell them, the news icon is now selected news. So that should be conveyed to the user, not hidden from them. Oh yeah, of course.
How does the screen reader recognize such title?
Mm-hmm. So within, so you're talking about the title of the screen or the title within the actual content?
Is there a protocol? Like, for example, on a web page, it will be either H1 or it will have some sort of area role.
So you within a native app, usually within the configuration options for a given screen in Android Studio and Xcode, it'll say set the title of this screen here. Sometimes you need to programmatically override that, and if you do that, you can say for this screen, you'll do like screen.setTitle programmatically. So you can set the actual title that'll be read out to the screen reader. If you remove that title programmatically or through the interface, it may not read that out to the user. So
that's defined by Android?
That's defined by the given platform, yes. You can, and then also within the content, I think you could set header traits for certain elements within, because there's no HTML, but there are still elements within the page, right? Native elements that the screen reader will be able to read. Okay, any other questions so far? No. Touch target sizes. And this actually goes for websites too. If you have a website, you want to check the touch target sizes, especially on a mobile device, right? Because it could look great. You have this huge monitor in your office, it looks great. You go on a little tiny screen and it's like, everything's squished together. So touch targets should be large enough to be activated by the user. Sometimes, even those without disabilities, if you're trying to hold a bag and trying to use an app at the same time, it's very difficult, right? Especially if you're trying to hit this little tiny, dot on the screen to actually get it to activate something. So you want a large enough that, and there are sort of with iOS and Android, at the bottom you can see what the touch target sizes, recommendations that they have, so that they're easy to be activated by the user. Images/buttons can be smaller, but there should be padding around it as well. So if you have a smaller image, you can actually add padding around it. That's sort of white space, but that's still, you're able to touch that area and it will understand that where it needs to go. Link resources together. So if you have an image and you have a piece of text, you can wrap them in a single element. That's then considered one touch target. And then adjacent elements. So if you have elements too close to each other, and I'm sure we've all done this, where you meant to hit one button and you hit another one on the phone. Links. So like HTML, links should convey meaning to the user. If it just says click here, the screen will read click here. It's not going to be very informative for them. In iOS, there's something called the link trait. You can usually tell in the iOS inspector if you have the source code when they're going to an external website. And iOS will read out the word link as part of its screen reader, while I think Android will play a noise. It'll give you, I think, a sort of ding for links. And then I'm not going to go too much into the other native controls, but if you have a slider and they go over it, it should say, if it's off, it should say off, disabled. You should, for these are native controls that kind of look custom, like progress bars, but they should convey the meaning and the state of this to the given users, right? Text fields should have associated labels as well. So when you have dialogues, alerts, validation, so if you have a pop-up for it, again, I would recommend not doing custom pop-ups. Make sure that it's kind of a native pop-up. Focus should go into the dialogue. So even when you're browsing a website, you have a modal come up, right? That sort of overlays the screen. You can't do anything. The screen reader on a computer or on a website should have its focus, or the tab, the focus should go to the modal so that you can do actions within the modal and explore the modal. The same thing applies to an app. And they should be navigable by the keyboard, and they should be able to be cleared by the keyboard. And make sure, so you can also set sort of accessibility, kind of like ARIA. There's tags that can be set. The accessibility views modal will actually, if you set the property, it will sort of know what to do for it. And then alerts should have proper title and descriptive text associated with them. And since you're usually building for each platform, you kind of know, it's not like the web where, okay, someone might be on a Mac, someone might be on a PC, Linux, whatnot. You're building it for that specific platform, so the accessibility features, okay, this will work on this. It should be read out properly, right? If you check iPhone, iPad, you're most likely going to get it to work. It's not like, does this work in IE and Firefox and Chrome on Windows? So that's kind of the advantage of being locked into that one platform. Okay, and just some links for accessibility. They have great documentation for accessibility on each platform. Voiceover commands, Android talkback commands. There's actually, I was going through, and Samsung has their own voice assistant, which I found strange. So Android has talkback and Samsung voice assistant. I'm like, that's one too many, I think, to do. So I'll just probably review voiceover and talkback. And DQ University is a great resource for mobile app accessibility.